Hello everyone, before I go into the video to show you how I went from here to here using the Dehancer plugin, I just want to leave a little disclaimer. Dehancer reached out and has offered a copy of this plugin and in return requested that I make a video tutorial or review. However, Dehancer has had no say in the contents of this video. I'm here in the color tab of Davinci Resolve. The footage I'm working with is from the Fujifilm X-T4. In this video I'll be showing Dehancer's features. This video does not aim at emulating a particular look, so the selection of the film stock may be somewhat arbitrary. To do this, I will create a couple of nodes, press Option plus S or Alt plus S on Windows. I would normally use nodes on the left for some basic adjustments, and then I would use the rightmost one for Dehancer. The big question is whether Dehancer will automatically give a pleasing result, or whether additional steps will be required. So to enable the plugin, go to the FX tab, search for Dehancer and drag the plugin onto a node. You can see right away that the footage doesn't look that good. Dehancer by default enables a number of settings, but these will not automatically fit your footage. So we'll need to do a bit of work to make it look better. Before we continue, let's expand the image using Shift plus F. The first step in Dehancer is to make sure your source matches your input color space. If your input is in a different color space, you can select it in the input section. The input section also allows for exposure compensation, temperature, tint and difference, but I would typically do most of these outside of Dehancer. Let's start with adding a different film emulation as a starting point, as this is likely part of the reason why you would get this plugin. There are a lot of film stocks to choose from, and I would actually much prefer if Dehancer could recommend some based on the color and exposure of the footage that I have. As you can see here, some look better than others for this particular shot. Some do give some decent instant results, but that will still require some tweaking. For this example, I'm going to select Codec Gold 200. I like the starting point that it gives me, and it's not too overpowering. Here is the before, and here's the after. The image looks a little bit dull, but that's because we just lost a bunch of contrast and saturation. Once you have selected a film simulation, you have this option to push and pull, effectively giving you control over color contrast within the film profile. It also allows for a little bit of clipping control. In this case I thought it looked good at about 0.3, so let's just leave it at that. After selecting the film profile, Dehancer recommends to go into the expand feature, rather than the film developer compression. Expand allows to change the white and black points, improving the contrast, and as we noticed, the film simulation reduced the contrast a little bit. Increasing the black point moves more of the shadows to all black. Reducing the white point makes the whites clip more quickly. This is the level that I like both of these to be at. The film developer feature can be used to change contrast and to subtly change saturation. I do not use this tool a lot, but I can show you what it does. When you put the contrast boost to a non-zero value, then the gamma correction will shift the midtones to your highlights or to your shadows. If you do not make changes to the contrast boost, the gamma correction or color separation will not do anything. So let's exaggerate the contrast boost a little bit. Now you can see that the midtones are now shifting as you move the slider. To understand the color separation, let's go to another video that has a lot of red in it. Again, let's boost the contrast a little bit, otherwise color separation doesn't do anything. The color separation slider now allows you to reduce the saturation of the most intense colors when lowered from 100. The color boost allows you to change the overall saturation, but the tool ensures it doesn't clip even if you increase it too much. Let's go back to the other image and have a look at my favorite tool, which is the film compression feature. Film compression tool works well in any shot with a lot of highlights. The different highlight areas in the shot are good examples, and I'll try to show why it is one of my favorite features. I also think the film compression works really well in combination with film grain, which is enabled by default. Effectively, film compression redistributes the highlights as it pushes more highlights to the midtones. Let's zoom into the image and enable the film compression feature. Instead of looking at the sky, let's have a look at this bright object. We need to enable the film compression as it is not on by default. After enabling, we can see the highlight area change. The impact slider determines how much of the highlights is pushed to the midtones. You can see when increasing the impact, the highlights look like they have a smoother gradient from darker to brighter areas. The white point slider will cause more clipping when low, but when increased, the whites will look more gray. Another way to clearly affect the highlights is by going back to the primary rules in Davinci Resolve. Press Shift plus F to bring back the primary rules and select the first node. And now we can move the gain wheel to reduce the highlights. Select the Dehancer node again and Shift plus F to get a larger view. The tonal range is the next slider in the film compression tool. It determines how much of the tonal range is affected by this compression. If you select very high values, the entire image gets affected. You can see that in this example, it does not look very good at all. So you probably don't want to do that most of the time. The color density then affects the saturation in this compressed range, and because there's already almost no color in the highlights, this doesn't do much here. In the print section, there are a couple of print profiles that can be considered. The footage that we're going to look at here is actually from the DJI Osmo Pocket 3. We have 4 options I would consider. There's linear and glossy, which are subtle effects, and then Kodak and Fuji print films are quite strong effects. Kodak Glossy was an ideal option for the image earlier on. So how do you select which one to choose? Well, the print film does one of 2 things. 1, it emulates the look of printing onto paper, or 2, it emulates the look coming from Kodak or Fuji's positive films used for projecting in cinema. Let's have a look at the film profiles used earlier. Amongst others, Dehancer offers film profiles like Kodak Vision 3, which are motion picture negative films, and then there is photographic negative film with a much longer list. As a starting point, the Kodak Endura Glossy can work for all, but is aimed at the photo film, whereas Fuji and Kodak print films are meant to be used in combination with the motion picture film stocks. Let's have a look at 2 examples of these with some further adjustments. The color heads can now be used to tweak the colors a little bit. The top 3 sliders affect the overall color tone, and you can adjust that to your liking. The gang button allows to shift all sliders at once, and the next 3 sliders affect the tone of shadows, midtones, and highlights individually. If you do not, for example, like the bluish shadows in some of the Kodak Vision 3 film stocks, you can use the color heads to make adjustments to this. Let's have a look at Halation and Bloom before having a look at film grain. Halation is something I would not use every time. Halation will give a bit of a halo effect around contrasting edges and highlights, so Dehancer defaults to this 35mm profile. If you select the one without ramjet, the halation is actually more pronounced, and you can clearly see this as you zoom in. When you move to a smaller profile like 8mm, the level of halation increases as well. This is too much halation, so we can reduce the amplification. And finally, you can also create a custom profile. In this image, let's go for 35mm without the ramjet but reduce the strength. So next up is Bloom, which spreads highlights areas onto the surrounding areas in your image, as you can see when we move the slider back and forth. Bloom also has custom settings with more details on what each of these can do on the Dehancer website. The larger 65mm profile will show less blooming. Let's select the default 35mm with moderate amplification. As I mentioned before, I like how the film grain looks together with the film compression in this image. Several film grain profiles are available where you can select the amount of grain you want in your image. To see the effect of film grain and see how pleasing it is, let's zoom in on the clouds. You can now select different film grain profiles, and as I understand, these are more than simple overlays. Typically I would select the 35mm of my footage and then reduce the amount. Often I find somewhere between 10 and 25 works pretty well for me. And again, there is a custom option where you can manually create the grain profile. The Overscan feature is a stylistic effect overlaying the film gate onto your footage. It can work well if you're going for certain effects. I won't go into a lot of detail, so let me show you a few examples. Finally, I want to show 3 effects that I've not used a lot and actually do not intend to use very often. The first one is film damage, which adds some film damage to your footage. Here's the before footage, and here is some footage where the film damage applied, although slightly exaggerated. The film breath feature creates exposure and tint shifts in your footage. Here's an example of this. Let's again look at the before. And here is the after. And you can clearly see the tint shifting around. The final one is gate weave, which is effectively the movement of the film. The following example again shows this effect. So I've used Dehancer Pro for almost a month now. It's been about 4 weeks. And overall, I really enjoyed playing around with it. It gives you a lot of creative control, sometimes at the expense of ease of use, and will require users to go back to the Dehancer website to understand some of the sliders. Although I do think some settings take some time to understand, in most cases I was able to get a pleasing look fairly quickly, especially after weeks of using it and making this video. It will not give you instantly good results as some people might expect. It's a nice tool to have in a color grading toolbox, but definitely recommend you get a trial and try it out yourself. After all, it's an expensive tool that you may be able to replace with other workflows. Something like Resolve's Film Look Creator may be sufficient for your specific needs.